The movie opens up in a nightclub in Istanbul, where our hero, Özgür Arink, is celebrating his 18th birthday with a party. The teenager is surrounded by loud music, girls, and drinks. He's having so much fun that he takes a wild leap onto his giant birthday cake. After partying all night, he crashes and falls asleep. Finally, his legal caretaker, Hamdi, scoops him up and drives him home in a fancy Ferrari. Elsewhere, Elif, a girl from the village of Antatep, is on a bus to Istanbul. She wants to meet Özgür and is checking news stories about him. The following day, Özgür wakes up late in the morning in his hotel room. It is revealed that he lost his parents at an early age and was raised by his grandfather. Ever since his grandfather passed away, he has been the sole heir of the multi-million-dollar business. The bottomless pit of money and a lack of responsibility have made him an extremely spoiled teenager. Outside the bedroom, Hamdi is waiting for him. The lawyer shows Özgür that his nightclub antics have made it into the national newspaper. Reminding that this kind of news brings bad PR to the business, Hamdi points out that he has now come of age. A meeting is then set for later in the day where his grandfather's will shall be discussed. Confused, Özgür asks why he needs to attend a meeting when he is the sole heir of the business. But the lawyer refuses to answer and walks away. Afterwards, the teenager goes downstairs for his breakfast. Elif also arrives at the hotel and promptly greets him. The young girl expects Özgür to recognize her, but he has no clue who she is. Surprised, she reveals that she traveled far just to meet him and asks if they can talk. He coldly replies that she should talk to his assistant and get an appointment first. Taken aback by the hostility, Elif apologizes and leaves. That afternoon, Özgür attends the meeting where he gets a surprise from his deceased grandfather's will. He has to leave his luxurious life in Istanbul and graduate from a public school in a small village. If he fails to abide by the rules, the entire property will be donated to a charity. Baffled, the teenager throws a temper tantrum and asks for his motorbike to go hang out with his friends. However, Hamdi replies that he will not be allowed to use any facilities until he graduates. Thus, Özgür is forced to travel to a village by the Aegean Sea on a public bus. After a while, our hero arrives in the small village of Antatep, where he's greeted by local people. He asks for directions to house number 47 with a local restaurant owner, Saliha, who points him to a villa up the hill. As soon as he leaves, the restaurant owner goes inside and informs Elif about his arrival. The young girl works a lot of different jobs in the village, one of which is a waitress in the restaurant. She comes out and watches Özgür walk away towards his new home. Feeling slightly nauseous, she almost collapses to the ground, but Saliha grabs her. The following day, our hero comes to the restaurant for his meal. He orders a lot of food and walks to the counter for the payment. Recognizing Elif from their earlier meeting, he hands her a platinum credit card. Unbeknownst to the spoiled teenager, the bank has stopped sending funds to his account, and thus his card is declined. Elif then cuts the platinum card right in front of him. Furious, Özgür pays with whatever cash is in his wallet and throws a tantrum at her. He points out that her fingers are dirty and the restaurant also needs cleaning. Later that night, we see Elif's fingers aren't actually dirty. She makes Saliha regularly apply henna on her fingers as it is a symbol of deep love. She then has a conversation with the restaurant owner. Talking about her recurring dream, the young girl says she saw the entire village covered by snow. The town hasn't seen snow for 5 years, but Saliha prays for her dream to come true. Next, Özgür goes to the local public school as required by his grandfather's will. He once again meets Elif, who works as a part-time teaching assistant there. After she leaves for the principal's office, Özgür surveys all the students in the class. He then goes to the biggest student, Manat, and calls him out for a fight on the basketball court. Outside, a large crowd gathers to see what's happening between the new student and Manat. Özgür takes the big student to the side and apologizes for what he's about to do. The spoiled teenager plans to instigate a fight in the school so that the principal is forced to throw him out. He then punches Manat across the face. To his surprise, the giant student begins to cry instead of fighting back. In the next scene, Özgür is sitting in Manat's home late at night. The latter's father points out that his son's face is completely swollen. Apologizing for his mistake, Osgur encourages him to write a complaint letter to the school administration. However, instead of confronting the new student, he invites Osgur for dinner. This shocks our hero, but he accepts the dinner and ends up having a wonderful time. After the meal, Osgur expresses his gratitude towards the family and prepares to leave. Just then, Monot gives him a bundle of homemade snacks and a torch before wishing him good night. The humility of Monot's family touches the spoiled teenager. On the way home, he meets Elif and apologizes for how he behaved at the hotel in Istanbul. The next day at school, Osgur comes up with another plan to skip his classes. He gives 10,000 Turkish lira to the principal and tells him he wishes to graduate without attending the classes. When the principal looks baffled at the suggestion, the teenager adds 5,000 liras. He then promises to pay even more on the day of his graduation. However, the principal refuses the bribe and warns him to attend daily classes. If he fails to do so, he will be cut off from the school. Turns out the principal is an old friend of Osgur's parents and wants the teenager to become an honest person. That afternoon, some of Osgur's friends arrive at the village to meet him. The group sits down in Saliha's restaurant, chatting about the recent incidents. At the exact moment, Elif arrives at the restaurant to begin her shift. She's jealous of how Osgur sits next to a girl, Emel. On the other hand, Emel vocally complains about the restaurant. She points out that the furnishing is outdated and how the waitress constantly sulks. She then suggests spending the night in his villa. However, Osgur is offended by her bad behavior towards Elif. So he pays the bill and asks his friend to return to their hotel. A few days later, Elif and her group are working on a play to raise money for a local orphanage. She asks Osgur to play the role of the mother. However, this triggers a strong reaction out of the teenager, and he storms off without explaining anything. Later, we see him sitting alone at the top of a hill looking at the village below. Something is clearly bothering him. He then grabs his bicycle and rides to the local orphanage amidst the rain. It is revealed that when he was a kid, his parents used to run this orphanage. He grew up with the kids here and was schooled by his parents. On one unfortunate night, both of them were killed in a car accident, leaving behind their young son in the care of his grandfather. The sudden memories of his parents trigger an anxiety attack, and he collapses in the pouring rain. A few moments later, Elif arrives at the scene and finds Osgur burning with fever. She quickly takes him to his home and starts taking care of him. A few days pass and our hero finally wakes up from the fever. Outside, Elif is cooking dinner for him, and the two have a heart-to-heart conversation. He opens up about how he grew up in hotels, never knowing how it feels to have a family. He thanks her for taking care of him, and she responds with a smile. After this, they have dinner together, where she reveals that she plans to visit a British director the next day. Since she doesn't speak English, Osgur offers to join her for the trip. The following day, the duo travels to the nearby city to meet the director, Emma. She's pretty impressed with Elif's writing and agrees to direct the play. Surprisingly, she also suggests that Osgur play the role of the mother. In the next scene, we see Emma directing the kids for the play at the school. She then calls Elif to the center to practice the dance routine. At the same time, Osgur bursts into the classroom on crutches and plaster around his ankle. He explains that he accidentally slipped down the stairs and broke 2 bones. In reality, he's making up the whole story so that he won't have to participate in the play. As they converse, Elif suddenly feels nauseous and passes out. This scares Osgur, so he immediately throws away the crutches and carries her to the hospital. After a few hours, she wakes up to Saliha and the school principal watching over her. The restaurant owner tells her that Osgur has been waiting to see her for hours. However, Elif forbids anyone from telling him about her health issues. She then quietly leaves the hospital without telling him. A few days later, the duo bumps into each other at school. She asks him why he hasn't even sent a single text. He apologizes, saying the play rehearsals have been keeping him busy. To make it up to her, he pulls out a beautiful shawl and presents it to her. Later that day, everyone heads off to a nearby orchard to pick up olives. Osgur, who is not fond of manual labor, quickly gets tired, so he decides to take a break. Meanwhile, Elif lugs a heavy sack of olives towards a waiting tractor. Seeing her struggle with the heavy load, he jumps in and takes the sack. After a tough day under the sun, each student earns 30 lira. Although it's not much, it's still a good amount to donate to the local orphanage. On their way back to the school, one of the students tells Özgür that Elif works for the local orphanage and regularly collects funds for the children in the institution. That night, Özgür calls Elif to check if the children at the orphanage need any help. However, the call is picked up by Saliha, who tells him that his friend has passed out once more. This worries our hero, and he quickly rushes to the hospital. At the hospital, Saliha drops a bombshell on Özgür. She confesses that Elif has a rare heart condition that she has battled since childhood. Despite their best efforts, doctors can't seem to fix the issue. The restaurant owner worries Elif won't be around much longer. Barely holding her tears, she rushes to the bathroom, leaving Özgür heartbroken. By this point, it is clear that he loves her deeply. Back from the hospital, Elif and Özgür climb the hill overlooking their village. Here she explains that she works multiple jobs to be able to rent a big, airy house with many windows. Immediately, Özgür hands her the keys to his villa, offering it for free. However, she adds that she wants to rent a place for the orphanage, which is facing eviction from its current home. The next day, Özgür sets off to Istanbul, determined to save the orphanage. He meets with his lawyer Hamdi, who reveals that the orphanage actually belongs to Özgür's grandfather. Infuriated at the thought of the children being evicted from their rightful home, the teenager demands the eviction notice be withdrawn. Unfortunately, Hamdi explains that cannot be done legally, but proposes a different solution. If Özgür renounces his inheritance, including the family business and property, he can claim the orphanage and its land. Faced with this life-altering choice, the teenager hesitates. Meanwhile, he also seeks medical expertise, consulting a renowned doctor about Elif's heart condition. But the doctor gives him grim news. The condition is incredibly rare, and a cure seems almost impossible. Disheartened, Özgür returns to the village, not knowing what to do. At the village bus stop, Saliha informs him that Elif has decided to move into his villa. The young girl knows that she could die at any moment and wants to enjoy the rest of her life. However, the restaurant owner isn't convinced it's the right path. Özgür is a rich guy from the city and has spent all his life mixing with various women. If he eventually returns to Istanbul, the temporary attachment would only cause more heartbreak for the poor girl. In the next scene, Özgür arrives at the villa to find Elif waiting at the door. She bursts with excitement and shares her plan to move in and savor every remaining moment with him. However, Özgür, who is haunted by Saliha's words, tries to refuse her. He hesitantly tells a lie, claiming he sees only friendship between them. Though hurt, she collects her bags and leaves the villa without a fuss. After a few weeks, Özgür makes a life-altering decision. He gives up his wealth and inheritance in return for the orphanage and surrounding land. Meanwhile, he tries to contact Elif, but she refuses to answer his calls. Undeterred, he seeks her out at the orphanage where she works. A staff member informs him that she's strolling around the dockyard. But before he can follow, a snippet of conversation between two children freezes him in place. Suddenly, a flood of memories crashes through his mind, transporting him back to childhood. He remembers the orphanage, his parents, and a young girl named Elif who used to live with them. Before leaving for Istanbul, he promised her he would return one day. That is why she expected him to recognize her when they met in the Istanbul hotel for the first time. With this new information, our hero rushes towards the dockyard, where he finds Elif alone. He confesses his love for her and reveals that he remembers everything. The two then share a kiss in the rain and decide to move into the villa together. After a few days, the principal joins them for dinner. As they converse, he reveals a hidden chapter of Özgür's past. Born into Istanbul's wealth, his mother defied expectations and fell in love with a humble village teacher. The two then ran an orphanage despite her father's disapproval. One day, when they were traveling to Istanbul to seek financial aid for their institution, they met with a deadly accident. Unfortunately, both of them were killed on the spot. The accident deeply scarred Özgür's grandfather, leaving him consumed by guilt. He blamed himself for his children's loss and never set foot in the village again. That is why he wanted his grandson to go to the village and become an honest person like his parents. The next day, an emotional Oscar confesses to Elif that he doesn't remember most of his childhood. He has shut all the memories along with the trauma, but he is now happy and wants to spend all his life in the village with her. Together, they practice for the play, travel around the area, and spend several beautiful moments together. One evening, a panic attack grips Elif, sending her collapsing in the bathroom. Oscar quickly bursts through the door after hearing the commotion. As he embraces her in his arms, he witnesses the raw fear of her attack for the first time. The incident leaves him shaken to the core. Realizing the preciousness of their time together, Oscar develops a plan. He pours his heart onto small notes and carefully disguises them as fake medical tablets. Later, during a romantic dinner, he gives her a jar full of these tablets. Overwhelmed by all the heartfelt messages on the notes, she bawls her eyes out. In the next scene, the play is finally performed at school. It explores several themes, like why people leave their children at the orphanage, before shifting to a more romantic theme. By the end of the play, the two lovebirds get married on stage. The movie's final scene shows us Elif and Oscar sitting outside the orphanage. As the snow falls on the village for the first time in 5 years, Elif passes away in the arms of her lover.